Good evening and welcome. Tonight we will be going over the history and the geography of the Azores, which is part of Portugal. As you can see, it's definitely not part of mainland Portugal because it's a little archipelago of islands here out in the Atlantic Ocean. Before we get into that, a couple of notes. First of all, number one, this happened. My cat bit me while we were playing. It got infected. It has to be bandaged for the next couple of days until the inflammation and all that goes down. So just bear with me the next couple of videos. You're probably going to see my finger all bandaged up, but I'm okay. It's getting much better. Number two, if you are a current viewer of my channel, a regular viewer of my channel, I did not tease this last country video because I had left it out of my list. I made my own list of every region of the world in alphabetical order, and therefore I made a lot of mistakes. I left out the Azores and Madeira on my list. So thank you to the person who commented and let me know that I had left out these beautiful islands, and I went, oh darn, I absolutely did, didn't I? So I quickly added them to the list, and since I was laid up in bed all weekend with my poor finger, I thought, why not just make that video now, throw it in there. So here we are. So thank you again, and if anyone out there thinks I might have missed a place, please do let me know, because chances are I did. So thank you again. Let's get into these gorgeous islands, starting with its name, because I have heard Azores, I've heard Azores, and I've heard Azores. I've always heard Azores, but that's the Portuguese pronunciation, and I always try to go for the American English pronunciation because I speak American English on this channel, which I've heard Azores, I've heard Azores for English. Azores sounds like bad. I think that word makes my ears sad. It doesn't sound like how these islands are. I think Azores is much better to describe these gorgeous islands, if that makes any sense. So I'm gonna go with that pronunciation. I think it's an either or, so I'm gonna go with that one. So here are the islands of the Azores. Down here we have Santa Maria. Here's the largest, São Miguel, with the capital city of Ponta Delgada right there. Over here we have Terceira. Up here is Graciosa. This is São Jorge. This is Pico. This one is Faial. Then over here we have Flores and little tiny Corvo. If any of those pronunciations aren't perfectly Portuguese, I apologize. Doing my best here. I try to look up how to correctly pronounce them all, but again, I'm trying to do American English here, so I'm doing my best. These islands are very, very unique and special in that they are all volcanic. They are part of a region known as Macronesia. I know I talk about Micronesia, Polynesia, Melanesia, and the Pacific. The Atlantic has Macronesia. And what makes the islands of Macronesia special is that most of them, I believe, are part of the Mid-Atlantic Ridge, which is a mountain chain that runs all the way down the middle of the Atlantic, as the name implies. It is actually the longest mountain chain on the planet, but since almost all of them are underwater, it doesn't really count, right? But those mountains, and in particular these islands, are formed by the combination of three tectonic plates meeting deep under the Earth's crust: the Eurasian plate, the African plate, and the North American plate. Which, if you know where tectonic plates meet, a lot of activity occurs, so hence volcanoes appear, including these spectacular volcanic islands here, some of which have many different cones, Some of them are quite active. I think all of them technically are active, but there hasn't been any massive eruptions for the past, 400 years? Something like that. And therefore, these islands, they've got the Gulf Stream going on, the stream, almost like an underwater river, coming from the Gulf of Mexico, heading up to Northern Europe, which is very, very warm. You've got that going, you've got the volcanic activity going. It creates this wonderful, lush environment, and I'm sure you'd think, oh, like palm trees, sandy beaches, all of that. Actually, no, it's very wooded. It's very, very forested. There are lots of neat tropical little plant friends growing around the islands, but for the most part, you walk on them and you feel like you're on mainland forest. It's really gorgeous. We'll take a look at it on Google Earth. The best part of me getting an infection on my finger this weekend was I got to play around on these islands on Google Earth and just fall in love with them. I mean, I've already loved them because they're stunning and gorgeous, but even more so now. So the history of these islands is quite unique. Nobody really inhabited these islands until the 1400s. There is some evidence that there might have been a prehistoric culture, but it's not 100%. There's also some evidence that the Vikings knew of these islands and might have stayed around here, but there's no evidence of any Viking settlement. It's not like in Canada or anything, where we know for sure that they had built homesteads or farms or anything like that, but they might have known about it. We know that from the DNA of some of the mice here, the mice that come from Viking lands that would have come on their ships. But the Portuguese, technically, would have been the first ones to know about or discover these islands sometime around the year 1427. This was during the era of Prince Henry the Navigator, who, despite the name, was not a navigator, but he loved navigation, and he sponsored many, many, many navigational adventures in the oceans around, mainly around Africa, trying to sail around it. So that's when these islands were first stumbled upon. The first settlements would have began in the 1430s, bringing Portuguese farmers over to colonize these islands. But surprisingly, over time, many of the settlers weren't Portuguese. Some of them were Flemings, as in they were from Flanders, in the Dutch parts of Europe, Belgium and the Netherlands. And they were kind of forcefully told to come here because they were defying the government a bit, and was like, listen, you can have your government that you don't like, or you can live in this lush island paradise and start over. Which is, who wouldn't want that, right? So there's a very large population of Flemings. The island as well. Islands as well. Tragedy occurred in the year 1522 on São Miguel, when a huge earthquake destroyed their capital city of Vila Franco do Campo. So they had moved the capital to what's now Ponta Delgada, which is now the capital of all the islands today. One of the main issues on the Azores during this time, the 1500s and then into the 1600s, was piracy. Many pirates, I think in particular English pirates, but various pirates, would plunder or attempt to plunder some of these islands, just sitting out here like little lame ducks, waiting to be stolen from. So that was a big issue. So during the Spanish period, 1582 to 1640, known as the Iberian Union, when Spain came to take over Portugal, and the peninsula was united in one country, and therefore these islands became Spanish. The Spanish were very serious about pirates because they were having big problems in the Caribbean and their colonies there. So they started to fortify the islands in defense against any attacks, many of which are still around today. I should have said there's 2 UNESCO sites here in the Azores, and one of them is here at Angra de Herio. I always have a hard time saying this. Angra do Heroísmo. One of the fortifications there is a UNESCO site. We're going to look at UNESCO sites before we look at Google Earth because I'm at a really weird angle and I don't think I'm going to be able to adjust it back and forth. So we'll get to them, don't you worry. However, Spanish control ended in 1640, like I said, once Portugal gained its independence from Spain. In the 1700s, a commercial venture was introduced to the Azores in the form of oranges. Oranges, of course, were very popular in Europe and very, very important to sailors because they give you enough vitamin C to prevent scurvy. So growing oranges was a big deal. It was a good stopover. There are a couple stopover ports on the islands for sailors coming to and from Europe, and grabbing a bunch of fresh oranges, great idea. However, tragedy struck in 1842 when a ship from Brazil stopped over and it carried an insect on it. And this pest in particular eats orange leaves, and it killed all of the oranges on the islands. So there went that venture, unfortunately. There were a couple of other issues happening on the islands. There was a lot of competition from orange groves in Europe that, pretty much made orange growing here, once they were all killed, pretty much worthless. There's also the issue of overpopulation on these islands. You can see they are not very big, and most of them are either forested or volcanoes. You can't really live on a volcano. So all of these factors together led to a lot of immigration, mainly to the United States, some to Brazil, other parts of the Americas. But from personal experience, anyone that I've met, I'd say like 95% of the people I've met who are of Portuguese ancestry came from the Azores. It's like to be expected if I meet someone that says they're Portuguese. 9 times out of 10, their ancestors came from here. So I don't know about Europe, but in America, most Portuguese people, from what I can tell, are from these islands due to that time of immigration. The next important period in its history came during World War II. Since it's almost right smack dab in the Atlantic Ocean between Europe and the Americas and North America, it was used as an Air Force and Navy base for the Allies. It was built here on the island of Terceira. You can see the little airplane there indicating an airstrip. And it's known as Lajes Field. And it's still owned and occupied by the Americans today. In 1976, the Azores was granted autonomy. And why is that? Well, for most of the 20th century, Portugal was ruled by a very nasty dictatorship. Not a good one. The whole Iberian Peninsula was having a lot of issues. I mean, most of Europe was, let's be real, most of Europe was having issues with dictatorships in the 20th century. But Portugal had the Carnation Revolution in the 1970s, which led to democracy coming to the country. And a lot, I think all of Portugal's colonies were like, hey, can we not be colonies anymore? Can we be independent or just break away from Portugal in general? And the new government was like, of course, we don't need you guys. It's 1975. We don't need colonies anymore, right? So there went the remainder of Portuguese colonies. A couple would hold on. There was Macau for a while, but they took longer to break away. It's China and all of that. It's a little complicated. But the Azores, there was a movement for independence, full independence, but not as strong as other Portuguese colonies like in Africa and Asia. So they were granted autonomy. Everyone seemed happy with that. They are technically part of Portugal, but they rule themselves. Portugal can hop over if there's an environmental disaster. Portugal will come help them out. If for whatever reason a war broke out, Portugal would come help out. I don't think it's going to happen anytime soon. But natural disasters could very well happen at any time because, like I said, these islands are very volcanic and a lot of earthquakes occur. I think the last major earthquake was on Terceira on January 1st, 1980, and devastated a lot of Angra do Heroísmo. I got it. And the city's now all rebuilt, of course, but it damaged a lot of historic buildings that were built back in like the 1500s, 1600s, but it's all better now. Little earthquakes happen all the time. São Miguel is quite active volcanically. I'll show you how the locals incorporate that into their diet on Google Earth. It's pretty fascinating. And that's pretty much it for the history of the Azores. It can be a little more complicated than that, but I don't like complications, so I just gave you the bare bones history. I could have got more in depth, but I'd rather spend the time showing you these beautiful islands on Google Earth. So let's head over to UNESCO's website and Google Earth and explore these islands more in depth. So like I said, we're actually going to start with UNESCO's World Heritage Sites on the islands. Starting with Pico Island, the landscape of the Pico Island vineyard culture. It says this 987 hectare site on the volcanic island of Pico, the second largest in the Azores archipelago, consists of a remarkable pattern of spaced out long linear walls running inland from and parallel to the rocky shore. The walls were built to protect the thousands of small, contiguous, rectangular plots, or kurais, from wind and seawater. Evidence of this viniculture, whose origins date back to the 15th century, is manifest in the extraordinary assembly of the fields in houses and early 19th century manor houses, in wine cellars, churches, and ports. The extraordinarily beautiful man-made landscape of the site is the best remaining area of a once much more widespread practice. Today I talked about the oranges that were grown on the islands. Thriving today, as they always have been, has been grapes made for making wine. And the farmers used all of the volcanic basalt rocks you can find all throughout the islands here to construct these little barrier walls, nice and high, to keep out the sea winds and the sea salt that blows down from the ocean. And this little windmill always pops up. I wonder if that's a Flemish thing that was brought over, because it's really cute. We'll take a look at these on Google Earth because these pictures don't really do it justice. It's remarkably beautiful. But next we have the central zone of the town of Angra do Heroísmo in the Azores. Situated on one of the islands in the Azores archipelago, this was an obligatory port of call from the 15th century until the advent of the steamship in the 19th century. The 400-year-old San Sebastião and San João Baptista fortifications are unique examples of military architecture. Damaged by an earthquake in 1980, Angra is now being restored. Now, unfortunately, on Google Earth, the pictures in this town aren't great. So we're not going to really take a look, but the pictures here are good, so we can see them here. These beautiful old cathedrals here that were mostly destroyed during the earthquake, now all rebuilt to their former glory. See the big looming mountain there in the distance. And, yeah, I guess you can't really see the forts here, can you? But they're good old Spanish/Portuguese forts. So, that's that. Let's head over to Google Earth. So here we are in the Azores. And we're going to start by zooming out so you can see exactly where we are in the world, because they might be quite hard to find because they're very, very small. So as you can see, we are out here in the Atlantic. I guess it's not really smack dab in the middle, like I said, but close enough, right? And what's neat about Google Earth is that you can really see the tectonic plates here, especially this big crack that separates the North American plate from the Eurasian plate here. The African one's a little harder to see, but the African plate is a little slippery in and of itself. It's the one that's splitting apart over here. But yeah, this is probably the easiest tectonic plate to see from above, right? That's what makes Iceland so active as well. You can see it running through there. It's all a huge mountain range, and these are the tops of some of those mountains. Some of the biggest mountains technically on the planet, but since they're underwater, they don't really count. Sorry, mountains. So I wonder if that's a ridge here. I don't know. So we're going to start on San Miguel and the beautiful, beautiful sights to see. I'm going to start by showing you some of these gorgeous crater lakes here in the slideshow. Bustling town there. Big crater lakes, which you can find over here and over here. You can tell it's volcanic based on the color of the water there. It's not a very clean color, you know. It's not crystal and blue. There's lots of minerals in there making it that greenish color. I guess starting over here we can see Ponta Delgada. Let me see this. A banana plantation, it says. I don't know Portuguese, but I know French, so I understand enough of that. Banana plantation over here. How fun is that? Growing some ananas. But we're going to look at all the nature on this island. Oh, maybe not playgrounds. Why don't we look at this Mirador? It is so green and lush and beautiful here. It's basically like if Iceland wasn't cold, this is what it would be like. See, look how forested it is, right? I guess all the Vikings chopped down the trees in Iceland too, so it would probably be just as forested. But since this island is much further south, and it's got all this volcanic activity and the Gulf Stream going for it, it's very green and lush. And there's lots and lots of livestock. One of the first things the Portuguese did when they colonized was bring over a ton of livestock, and there's many big old moo-moos across the islands today. Gorgeous cliffs. It's a very, very beautiful place. But I think the neatest place on this island is, I gotta find it, is the town of Furnas. And I think this slideshow was the best one. As you can see, let me put it in 3D. It's in what looks like a little bit of a collapsed volcano there, or where volcanoes have slid, lava flows and things. You can see little volcano friends there. But it is full of these volcanic simmering pools, and if you've ever been in an area like this, do not smell that smoke. It's sulfur. It smells like nasty rotten eggs, and it is the worst smell. So you can enjoy it, just try not to inhale that. It is the worst smell. But you can just see in the middle of town we've got these furnaces, and here's a man-made one you can see. So what they do is they make stew, put it in a big pot, and then they put the pot in these holes, cover it up, and let Mother Earth cook the stew for them. I think that's awesome. I want to try that stew real bad. So yeah, you can see all the little actual man-made furnaces there, made to cook stew. How cool is that? How many places in the world can you make stew or eat stew that was cooked in a volcano, right? Lots of the hotels and resorts here have naturally heated pools, but again, they can be quite stinky, so be cautious. Alright, let's move on to another island. There's so much to see. I highly, highly encourage you to explore these islands on your own because there are hundreds, as you can see, of beautiful, beautiful pictures here. I'm only going to show you a couple of them because this is going to be a 2-hour video otherwise. I think Terceira is a really cool island. This volcano I think is fascinating because look at this breakup of the land here. You can see exactly where the volcanic soil ends and the farmland begins. And it's such a beautiful little patchwork from above, isn't it? How neat is that? It almost looks like cracked mud that's been dried in the sun, huh? So here's this big old volcano here. Let's take a look. I'm obsessed with the nature on these islands. Look at this. This is lush, beautiful fairy tale woods, right? Absolutely gorgeous. All moss covered and thriving. It's just so, so beautiful. Not something that you'd expect to find on, a tropical island, right? Look at this little fairy path there. You can go hiking up to the tops of the volcanoes. So many big trees. It pretty much looks like Northern California. How quaint is that? It's so beautiful. I think this slideshow is really pretty too. We'll take a look at a couple pictures. Look at this. This could be in Scandinavia. This could be even like New Zealand, right? Absolutely gorgeous. This little gem of Portugal. How lucky they are to have it. Absolutely stunning. There's a big old duck. And little churches, of course, because this is still Portugal. Look at all these little duck friends. But over here, like I said, is the Air Force Base here in Praia de Vitoria. And you can see the base right there. But not very exciting pictures, to be honest. And like I said, unfortunately, the pictures down in Angra do Heroísmo are fine, but I'd rather show you some other islands, I don't want to waste time with just decent pictures. Before we hit Pico, let's take a look at Graciosa. One of the little tiny islands, but look at this big crater. Look how volcanic this is. I mean, obviously, but a big old volcanic cave there. Look at a little modern house. You can explore all these cool caves created by, once upon a time, lava rushing through the earth and hardening and creating these huge caverns. And of course, the volcanic soil makes all of this lush greenery grow, as well as the nice weather. Very, very neat. And of course, all of these islands have airstrips. You can get from one to the other quite easily. This island is São Jorge, and kind of like Pico, they have really interesting kind of long shapes. It looks like a big sea creature's spine coming out of the ocean. Let me show you 3D. It's just a big, long, narrow strip of an island. But I'm excited to show you Pico. Pico might be my favorite island. I think São Miguel is my favorite to show you the little town, but Mount Pico is absolutely beautiful. What a cool big volcano. It has a great name, first of all, Mount Peak. And it is the highest point in Portugal. Do you think it's steaming, or is that just clouds blowing off? It might be steaming. Pretty sure it's still active. I think I would have heard if it wasn't. And it's just a beautiful big old mountain. Very like what I call like a cartoon volcano. Like if you asked a child to draw a picture of a volcano, it would look like that. And of course you've got all of these lichens growing on it, all of these cool volcanic rock formations, and it really dominates the island, doesn't it? You can see from above it is just absolutely massive. There's a museum here. Oh, it's the wine museum. Oh yes, this is what I want to show you. So here are the vineyards we read about. Actually, I gotta look. There's an actual slideshow. I think it might be this. Yeah. So we can see some of these cool rock walls that have been built. There's a little windmill to protect all of the grapes growing. Look at that. It's so precise. And you can just chip these rocks out of the earth and just build up little homes out of it. All kinds of stuff. So yeah, if you look at it from above, it really is something. Look at that. Just stretching and stretching and stretching. Isn't that something? All of these grapevines protected by all these little tiny walls that have been up for hundreds of years, creating this industry. It almost looks like a graveyard from above, doesn't it? It's so perfectly uniform. Big vineyard there. Fascinating little aspect of island life here. Something you can only find here in the Azores. Here's Fayal, which has another great volcano here, but I think I'm going to show you this slideshow. How quaint is that? I want to show you more of the national forests and things like that. So a nice little diversity there. We've got plants from all over that have been introduced, and most of them all grow naturally. Obviously, like the bananas that we saw, like those aren't natural, but a lot of these plants are very, very indigenous. Let's see, and yeah, there's so much to see. We'll take a look. We'll just pick a random one at the end of the video and explore it. But we've got 2 more islands to go to. We're gonna start with Little Corvo. It's a cloudy day when they took that picture. And look at this. So you can tell that this guy had a big boom once upon a time because it went poof. And this whole half of the island slid off. So it's not really, it's not the island's fault that it's the tiniest. But I guess it kind of is. Let's look at this volcano. You can see the crater lakes there, and here they are up close. Gorgeous, right? It looks like summer in Iceland. The big sloping cliffs there. Of course, the mumus. Wow, what a great picture. That's gorgeous. Sweet little cows all roaming around, enjoying the beautiful nature. Yeah, look at this sharp cliffside there. There's the caldera, the crater lake, and you can just tell by how uniform these lines are that was caused by a big volcanic boom once upon a time. And lastly, we have Flores, which of course you can see all of its little volcanoes and things. Let's just look at this one real quick just to get a good idea, because it's not like, one island is, barren. They're all beautiful. Every single one of these islands is just a haven of wildlife and green and beauty. Look at these moss rocks. It's so gorgeous. It isn't like, oh, there's one island you must visit because it's the most beautiful. They're all this beautiful. They're all this gorgeous. Of course, fog is an issue being along the ocean. They all have beautiful peaks. They all have beautiful forests. They all have beautiful hiking trails. They all have wonderful food. They're all great to see. But this island has something that the others don't, and that is the westernmost point in Europe. So this little rock out here, even though I think it's technically on the North American plate, the island's part of Europe. So this is as far west in Europe, technically, as you can go. The other one in mainland Europe is also in Portugal. So if you ever have the trivia question, where can you find the westernmost point? The answer is always Portugal. Depending on the technicalities, it doesn't matter. It's always Portugal. Just this little rock is as far west as you can go in Europe. Fun fact. The westernmost point in Europe. And those are the Azores. So you can see the tectonic plate right there. So I promised you a random slideshow. Let's head back to San Miguel. And why don't we just look at the slideshow of Porto Delgado real quick before we go. It is the capital city and all. It, of course, has this huge harbor. Beautiful, beautiful architecture. Beautiful homes. That's really pretty, isn't it? This big courtyard area. Big old cruise ship docking there. Looks like a little swimming pool. I wonder if it's volcanic. Gorgeous fountains. The city also has a lot of fascinating statues commemorating the explorers of Portugal. I just remembered, I read this little story about when Columbus was sailing back from his 1492 voyage. One of his ships, I think it was the Nina, docked at one of these islands for supplies, and because it was a Spanish ship, they arrested the crew, and Columbus had to come and argue them out of court. Just a fun fact. Where should we look? Do we look at this one? Oops. I don't think so. So let's close out the video here, looking at these beautiful trees. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this style of content, please consider subscribing. This is an ongoing series on my channel. We've almost made it through every single A region. Tomorrow's video will be in Ecuador, I promise you. And it will be the final region that starts with the letter A. And you're not going to want to miss it. I think I teased this last time. We're going to see the real El Dorado. Did you know El Dorado technically was real? I think it was very exaggerated. But technically there was an actual city of gold in the Andes. And we're going to see the ruins of it. So be sure to subscribe so you won't miss out. I hope that you found this video to be relaxing and educational. I hope that you have a good night.